Hi everybody, welcome to week 2 of class. In our first week we talked a lot about how the digital revolution has personally impacted us, the devices and gadgets and things that we feel have made the most impact on our lives, and then looking to the future, what we think will make the most impact in our lives. In week 2 we turn our attention a little bit more inward and a little bit more toward how we use some of our digital tools, and I think this week is probably the most technical of the weeks of class, and there's so much packed in that I had to make myself a little cheat sheet. So if you see me looking down or around or acting like I'm reading something, it's because I am. So with that, we'll get started. There's a couple of things from the text that I want to mention, and the first one is it's big, yet it's not really that big, and it'll really depend on your feelings about technology and terminology. And the first is that we always talk about how we go on the internet and read our mail, or we go on the internet and browse YouTube, or we go on the internet to do class. Technically, that's not the internet. The internet is all of the wires and the cables and the communications that computers use to talk to each other. The World Wide Web, which is a phrase that no one that I know uses regularly, is what we actually use to interact with each other on the internet. So it sort of lays on top of the internet and allows us to use regular English to communicate across various different platforms and devices. So I think that's important to note, but in the real world, we're still going to call it the internet. One of the other things that I want to mention is that there's a lot of talk about the browsers, and for the most part, unless you work in technology or are kind of a computer geek, you may not realize that there is more than one internet browser. If you have a PC, so if you use the Windows operating system, a lot of the times the browser that you'll use is called Internet Explorer, or I believe now Microsoft is calling it Microsoft Edge. It's not the one I use, but it is on the computer, and I do use it as a backup for when the browser I actually use seems to be acting a little bit funky. The browser that I use is called Firefox, and it is available across platforms, so it would be available on a Windows machine. If you have a Macintosh, it would be available on an Apple. I probably shouldn't call it Macintosh, that shows how old I am, but an iPad or iMac or a MacBook, any of those would use the Safari browser, but Firefox would be available there as well. There are also other browsers. Probably the most popular one that you might have heard of is Google Chrome, and Chrome is available on most platforms. It's mostly used, though, if you have an Android smartphone. So I have a Samsung Galaxy, and it is the browser that's on that. The other browser that the text mentions that probably doesn't get a lot of play and a lot of people don't know about it is Opera. It is one that I wouldn't use unless you're really stretching and trying to get your computer to work right. So when I get a lot of questions, oh, I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that, and my very first question to people when they ask me that is, did you try it in a different browser? So if you don't already have two browsers, you might consider looking at one. So with that, another thing that I wanted to talk about is something that transcends both what you read about in the text and what you're going to do in your week assignment, which is the digital citizenship worksheet. And in that, they are scenarios that you're going to talk about. One is email etiquette, and that student is Margaret, and she does not do very well on an assignment, and she kind of wants to know why. But instead of approaching her professor in a professional manner, she sends what looks to me like a text message, and that doesn't get her very far. So what you'll do with Margaret is rewrite her message. And one of the things that I find interesting when I teach this class is that a lot of times the student writes an email and it's not any better than what Margaret wrote. So I think that's really a teachable moment in that scenario. Another scenario you'll work with is Miguel, and poor Miguel, he kind of gets in trouble because he is just like us. He has a job, he has family, he's got responsibilities, but he's also attending class, and he runs into a deadline. Instead of asking for an extension on the deadline, or instead of turning his paper in late, Instead, Miguel copies information from the internet and pastes it into his paper without citing it. That is called plagiarism, and it is a very serious offense. It can get you expelled from the university, so never, ever, ever do that. When you research on the web, you can use it to research. It's a fantastic tool, but what you want to do is really think about the information you read, and when you write about it, write it in your own words all the time. So with Miguel, what you'll do is think about ways he could have avoided that situation. The third scenario is Irene, and Irene is a student I've run into more than once and really wish I hadn't. Turns out she's extremely rude in the classroom, and she makes some comments that really would be better on Twitter or Facebook when you're talking about politics rather than in a classroom where you need to show respect to other students. And in Irene's case, what you'll do is think about how you would have responded to this student in a different way. And this is another one where the responses that students come up with often are just as inappropriate as the one Irene wrote. So it, to me, is a second teachable moment. Our discussion is one of my favorites because we get to talk about social media, and I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I am a bit of a social introvert. I'm not the one you'll see out partying. I will be the one you do see at Walmart shopping, but I'm not particularly a social person. And social media lets me be social. On the downside, social media is mean. I don't care if you're on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, all three of them. People are mean, and I think that has to do with the anonymous aspect of it. You know, people you may be interacting with you don't even know, so you feel you can be meaner or call them names or be disrespectful, and it really does just make me tired. But for me, so far, the good outweighs the bad, so there I am. And you can read a couple of pieces of social media fame and not so fame for me down below in some of the texts that I've written. With that, that's a lot, but with that, I will let you get to your week 2 work. Don't forget, respond to your peers, at least 2 in this discussion. Don't forget to do the quiz, and if you have any questions, feel free to use the Ask Your Instructor forum. Everybody have a great week. Thanks.